welcome back everyone to Read to Me TT Bedtime Series. I hope you're all ready for another fun bedtime story. This is a bedtime book. So my name is Kathryn Nurse and I'm a cosmetic chemist. So what that really means is that I get to mix different chemicals. Thanks. I'm very smart. And I get to mix lots of different chemicals to make beauty products for all sorts of different people. So tonight I am joined by Dr. Vernice, who's going to tell you more about what she does.
Okay, so I'm, well, Dr. Vernice, but people call me Dr. V, so just to relax down a little bit. Yeah, so I am a human performance specialist, and what that means is that I spent a ton of time in school learning how to make people better at anything that they want to do. So done like a lot of school, stay in school, do all of your schoolwork, do all of your homework, do not cheat on your exams, and you and you will achieve great things. So it's just about becoming the best version of yourself. So I teach people how to do that.
All right, great. So we all know that these past few weeks we've all been staying inside our houses, and it hasn't been the funnest time. But just remember that we're all being heroes in our own way by just trying to do what we're supposed to do, stay inside and flatten the curve. And that's why we're doing all these things to engage us and give us activities to do while we're at home. So tonight's book is called The Protector's Pledge by Danielle McLean. I think actually that she's in the live with us. I think I saw her send a message earlier. So no pressure at all. It's a bit of a long book, so it's going to be broken up over the course of a few nights. Dr. V and I are going to start with the first 3 chapters, and then 2 completely new readers are going to come tomorrow and pick up where we left off, right? So is everybody ready?
All right, so that means you have us the entire weekend. Well, not us, but this book for the entire weekend. So yes. Let's go.
Okay. So starting from the beginning, yes. Chapter 1. A stranger knocks. Jason Felix Theodore Valentine. Granny B's call pierced its way from the kitchen, zipped along the narrow main corridor of the brick cottage, shot under the bedroom door, and found its mark on JV's well-attuned but less than receptive ears. He pulled the pillow down tighter over his head. Today was Saturday, and there wasn't one part of his body that was ready to leave the comforts of his sheets. Jason!
He considered feigning sleep, then thought better of getting the wrong side of Granny B. On the very first day of his much-anticipated 2-month-long vacation. Groaning, he pushed aside the pillow, dragged himself up, and looked out the window. It was early, much too early. The trees of the Oscuros Forest were black against the sky, filled with an inky blue and purple. JV knew those trees well. From as far back as he could remember, he would accompany Granny B into Oscuros and amble around carrying her big old basket, pretending to help search for bachelor's bun, lantana, shining bush, or any of the many other herbs she collected. In reality, he mostly amused himself, following lizards and frogs, and although there were times when he wandered out of Granny B's sight, he never ventured too far away. Often he felt a strange pull from the forest, as if an unseen force wanted to usher him deeper in, away from his grandmother, his home, and his village. On those occasions, he would resist the mysterious tug and stay where he could hear Granny B's low mutterings. He knew that she would be bending close to the ground, inspecting leaves, stems, and flowers, and assessing whether they would come in handy the following week. The curve of her bossy back, which had earned her the insolent but catchy nickname Bossy Bee, among Alcavere's children, would be more pronounced as she bent over. And JB would question for the 100th time why such a skilled healer hadn't fixed her own conspicuous imperfection.
Her long-standing explanation that some things in life were beyond fixing had never been acceptable to him. Studying the dark skyline, he wondered why he'd never gone exploring on his own. Granny B wouldn't have minded, and he wasn't afraid of the ever-shifting shadows or intimidated by the way the Caribbean sun never fully reached the forest floor. And he certainly didn't believe all those stories about the Oscuros Forest being a haven for the Sukuya, an old crone who shed her skin at night, turned into a ball of fire and drank human blood. Or the shape-shifting Lagahu, who prowled during the dark hours, always ready to sink his fangs into his next victim. Those tall tales were for babies, and JV was 12 after all. Yes, it was definitely time to embark on a quest. Although he had never met his parents, he liked to think that he had inherited his lust for adventure from them. His bedroom walls were lined with books filled with peril and excitement, and he had read and reread all the exploits of their brave young heroes. His dreams were drama-packed and danger-fraught escapades in which he scaled cliffs, dived for lost treasure on the ocean floor, and navigated jungles in search of foreign, forgotten cities. He was ready for live action, and it was waiting for him just beyond his backyard. This holiday, for sure, he was going to Jason! All thoughts of Oscuros fled JV's brain. Coming, he shouted, then mumbled, and it's JV, Granny, not Jason.
He fished his slippers from under the bed, put them on, and followed the smell of freshly made coconut bake. Oh, yes. As he peered into the Den of Delights, JV's name for the kitchen, hashtag Den of Delights, he was happy to see his grandmother transferring a steaming, flat, round loaf from a baking sheet to a cooling tray on the table. Her two gray braids were pinned in their usual place across the nape of her neck, and a dish towel hung over her right shoulder, which was 3 inches lower than her left. He stepped from behind the wall onto the slate gray linoleum tiles and surveyed the small room. It was in its usual state of disorder. A measuring spoon was balanced precariously on the edge of a well-stacked sink. Baking pans and trays of various sizes lay scattered along the countertops. A pile of onion, garlic, and fruit skins waited to be tossed into the bin, and a fresh, fine layer of flour covered all visible surfaces. A sharp metallic rattling drew his attention to the corner by the window. JV saw Granny B's parakeet cocotte, using a clawed foot to drag an empty food tin along the bottom of her cage. All right, Miss Lady, Granny B said. Every morning you make noise so? You know I didn't forget you. Your breakfast come in. She lifted the latch on the cage, carefully opening the door, and filled Cocotte's dish with pieces of mango and banana. Good living. When will you talk for me, eh? Morning, Granny.
Granny B froze, then leaned forward slightly. Cocotte was still pecking at the fruit. Chuckling, Granny B shook her head, turned around, and glanced at JB. Oh, you're finally up, Jason? She closed the cage. Well, good thing. She shuffled back to the stove, and JB inhaled the heavy scent of saltfish simmering with onions. Vernice, this is for you. Buljon was his favorite dish, and he kept his eyes on the pan as Granny B added the diced tomatoes and pepper. We have to make a trip to the market before it gets too late, she said, mixing the contents and taking a taste. You know how the freshest produce goes quick. Well, come on, help with the table. As good looking as you are with those long lashes and dimples, it can't set itself, you know. JB stifled a yawn and got out the placemats, all the while thinking of the countless other things he would rather do on the first morning of his vacation. Sleeping in was at the top of his list, of course, since the school term did not grant much time for lolling around in bed. Granny B always made sure that he was up by 6:30 on a weekday, that he had something to eat, was showered, and was dressed in his well-starched uniform of khaki long pants and a monogrammed blue shirt, and that he was waiting on the front porch by 7:15 at the very latest, to guarantee that he did not miss his ride to school with the Pearson children. It was beside the point that their father's white station wagon never pulled up to the gate before 7:30.
According to Granny B, Good manners dictated that he be ready early o'clock. Maybe he could have negotiated for more sleep if she were the one taking him to school, but her ancient Ford Cortina was now only capable of short weekly trips to the market. And weekends weren't much better. In Granny B's world, the prime time to do outdoor chores was in the early morning before the sun got too hot. So the first thing on his agenda during these 8 blissfully school-free weeks was to sleep as long and as late as he could get away with. His next priority would be exploring the forest. He put down the plates, knives, and forks in their places on the table and considered the mission he was devising, an exploratory trek into Oscuros, his very own adventure. He chewed on his thumbnail. The mission could be even more fun if he took someone along. It would still be his expedition, of course, but having company wouldn't hurt. The question was, who? He deliberated as he got 2 mugs from the cupboard overhead, one for Granny B's orange peel tea and the other for his cocoa. His best friend Riaz was an obvious choice and would make a perfect co-explorer, but he was spending the vacation with some cousins in the capital. There was a knock at the door, and Cocotte gave a stare as a startled flap of her emerald wings. It was a pretty bird. JV looked at the clock. It was just after 5:30. Who could be out there at this hour? He thought. A louder, more urgent series of knocks made it clear that whoever it was wasn't going away. Granny B turned off the stove and went to the door. Yes? She asked after she pulled it open.
A tall man was on the other side, leaning against the frame with his right arm cradled against his chest. Despite the darkness, JV could make out sunken eyes set in a broad, middle-aged and unshaven face. The man was perspiring heavily and in obvious pain. "You, Miss B?" he asked through gritted teeth. "The healer?" "Yes, son. Come in, come in." She put her hand gently on his shoulder to usher him forward, while eyeing the wound on his swollen forearm. "Snake got you? What kind?" "Not sure. It was too quick." "Well, first things first, let's keep that arm nice and low." Granny B led the stranger into the kitchen. She put on the old-fashioned reading glasses that hung from a silver chain around her neck, pulled a chair away from the table and motioned for him to sit. "JB, go get some twef while I clean off the bites. Make haste now." "Yes, Granny." JB bolted out the door, raced across the front porch and jumped down the 2 concrete steps that led into the yard. Orange streaks now slashed through the skies, ever lightning purples and blues. He ran past the hibiscus shrubs and the crotons along the side of the house and past Granny B's old car, resting comfortably in its usual spot under the soursop tree. He flashed by the guava, avocado, and orange trees and stopped only when he had reached the wire fence, almost completely covered with a slender, brilliantly green vine.
With its reputation as a ward against bewitchment, twef was a common sight in villages such as Alcavere, where there was still a healthy respect for superstition. JV pulled fistfuls of the shiny tree-pronged leaves off the vine and dashed back to the house. When he rushed in, Granny B was dripping a cloth in soapy water and gently applying it to the man's wound. She patted it dry and took a closer look at the bite marks. "See the pattern here, Mr. Phipps? Mr. Phipps, you see this pattern here?" she asked, pointing at the horseshoe-shaped impression of small cuts. "It wasn't a venomous one that got you. You're lucky, but you'll have to watch for infection." The stranger closed his eyes and sighed. Granny B studied him carefully. "I've been living in Alcavere since Moses parted the Red Sea, and I never saw you before," she said. "How did you know I could help?" "Nah, I'm not from around here, just passing through. I'm on my way up north and stopped to camp out not too far from here last night. Then this happened." He nodded towards his arm. "I didn't know what snake it was and thought the worst, so I started off for the village. Saw some folks who looked like they were heading to market. They told me about you and pointed the way." Granny B looked across the kitchen and saw JB. He was still panting heavily, but proudly held out his fists full of leaves, happy to have been of use in such a dire situation.
"You sure you left any leaves on the vine, Jason?" she smiled. "I just need a few to ease the pain. Rest the others on the far side of the counter over there for me, and I'll put them in the herb room later. And could you get a glass of water for Mr. Phipps, please? She put 4 or 5 leaves in her granite mortar, picked up the pestle, and began to pound away rhythmically, the cadence like the beat of a tribal war drum. Pock, 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 pock. So it went for a few minutes. Then Granny added a drop or two of a sweet-smelling oil, kind of like what I do. A little pinch of this and a little pinch of that, and finally pounded some more until the content had reached the desired consistency. JB loved to watch his grandmother work. She followed no recipe that he could see, but her fingers always knew exactly what to do. As JB looked on, Granny B used a wooden spatula to smear the thick green salve on the wound. She then took a piece of gauze from one of the kitchen drawers that served as their first aid kit, cut off a generous square, and bandaged the man's arm tightly. The soothing effect of the poultice was immediately visible. Mr. Phipps' shoulders dropped an inch, his face relaxed, and the lines on his deeply creased forehead became less pronounced. He slowly let out a long breath and opened his eyes, which he'd been holding tightly shut. Granny B patted his hand.
When you knocked, we were just going to have breakfast, Mr. Phipps. It's not much, some coconut bake, bulgjol, and tea, but you can join us. JV's eyes darted to the coconut bake, still untouched on the table. He wasn't sure he liked where things were heading. It was one thing to save a stranger's life, but quite another to give an open invitation to breakfast, especially when bake and bulgjol were allowed. I like this dude.
Yeah,
He held
like
his breath. He held his breath, waiting for Mr. Phipps to reply. Well, if it isn't too much trouble, Miss B, yes, I'd be grateful to have a little breakfast. JV sorrowfully looked at the bake and bulgjol and mourned the loss of a potential third serving, while Mr. Phipps moved to an unset place at the table. I really didn't eat much in the forest last night, he said. JV snapped out of his woe and stared at the stranger. You're staying in the forest? He bleated. I'll be exploring Oscuros this vacation. He headed to the cupboard and pulled out another plate and mug, his displeasure at having to share his breakfast forgotten. I kind of already know my way around certain parts because I've been going with Granny for a long time to help her collect herbs and stuff. But I really want to go exploring, you know? Maybe discover something cool or even a spot that no one else has ever seen. Have you been in Oscuros long? Have you seen anything interesting? Maybe I can go back with you. JV was so excited that the mug almost slipped from his hand.
The sudden questioning seemed to take Mr. Phipps by surprise. He was staring at JV in a wide-eyed and open-mouthed sort of way when Granny B interrupted. Mind your manners, Jason. Mr. Phipps here didn't say yes to breakfast so he could go through an Alcavere version of the Spanish Inquisition. Boy, let the man eat in peace. JV sat down but eyed Mr. Phipps expectantly. The gentleman, however, did not seem to be in any rush to continue the conversation and helped himself to 2 slices of bake and a generous serving of bulgjol. After he had finished the first slice and sighed appreciatively, he said, I wouldn't worry too much about that forest, you know, boy. I'm sure your granny here doesn't need you to go and get yourself lost. JV's anticipation instantly turned to indignation. Lost? Who, me? No way. I couldn't get lost in Oscuros, right, Granny? He turned to his grandmother. Granny B put a 3rd spoonful of sugar in her tea, stirred and smiled. I don't think there's too much in Oscuros that Jason can't handle. And in any case, she added, looking at JB with an arched eyebrow, he knows not to go beyond a certain point or to let sunset catch him in there. She took a sip of her tea and once again reached for the sugar bowl. Not quite sure whether Granny B had provided sufficient support for his arguments, JB pressed the matter further between mouthfuls of bake.
I'm pretty good in the forest, you know. I don't need a compass to tell what direction I'm going in. I know what plants to stay away from, and I can recognize lots of bird calls. He put the last forkful of bulgjol in his mouth and sat back, content with his breakfast and his list of skills. Mr. Phipps studied him for a moment. And what about the spirits? I'm no expert there, but you see that forest? He said, pointing in the direction of Oscuros. After only one night in there, I can tell you it has spirits for sure. Don't ask me what type. It was dark and I couldn't see too good, but I could tell you plenty stories about the spirits in the forest down south. Make you think twice about heading in this one. JV lowered his eyes. Oh, great, he thought. Someone else trying to frighten me with superstitious nonsense. All the villagers ever seemed to talk about was spirits and supernatural creatures in the forest. He had heard many stories about Papabois and Mamadalo, the legendary guardians of Oscuros and fierce protectors of its flora and fauna. Then there was a story about a local arsonist who had entered the forest intent on setting a fire. According to village lore, the firebug's encounter with the guardians was so horrific that he never struck a match again and went in his grave without revealing the details of what had happened beneath those trees to his grave. JB didn't think that there was any truth to such tales, but he had begun to wonder if so many people, including this traveler, could be wrong. He bit his lip, and Mr. Phibbs snickered.
Granny B looked up from her tea, raised an eyebrow, and held Mr. Phibbs' gaze. Like I said, there's not too much in Oscuros that Jason can't handle. The visitor smirked, shrugged, and took a third slice of bake along with another helping of bulljoy. Irked by how the conversation had gone, JB redirected his irritation to the quantity of food being consumed by their guest. You sure that it was only last night he didn't eat well? He didn't need to see Granny B's face to know that she was giving him a sharp look. One just did not speak to a guest or an adult like that in Granny B's house. JB watched as Mr. Phibbs continued chewing steadily, apparently oblivious to the exasperation that he had caused. My goodness, look at the time, Granny B said as she drained her mug, stood up, and started clearing away the empty dishes. 6:15. Oh no, please don't rush yourself, Mr. Phibbs. JB and I have to go to market for a few things, but you should rest a little before you head back out. We have a couch in there if you want to take a nap. She pointed to the modest sitting room just beyond the kitchen. Thank you, Miss B. I appreciate the hospitality. Jason will leave in 5 minutes. JB excused himself from the table and headed down the hallway to his bedroom. Halfway there, he turned, tiptoed back to the kitchen, and stayed behind the wall. Quite a little man you have there, Mr. Phibbs was saying.
A good boy, but stubborn, like a mule, and hotfoot too, as you can tell. Can't keep him home at all. He's always after some adventure. Anyhow, you'll be all right until we get back. Yes, ma'am. Don't worry about me. I'll be fine. JB heard the scraping of chairs and crept away. He was already waiting outside his room when Granny B appeared in the hall. He waved her over. Granny, you sure you want to leave him in here alone? Don't you think it's strange he's staying in the forest? He could be a thief, he whispered. I don't mind staying and keeping an eye on him. Granny B shook her head and smiled. Jason, I've been around since Jesus was a boy, you know. What you really want is to get out of a trip to the market and to bother that poor man some more about the forest. Unwilling to give up so easily, JV played his last card. But what if he steals something while we're gone? Remember Jason? Who's sick does look for doctor. Mr. Phibbs was in trouble and came for help. But even if he's up to mischief, what could he really take? Granny B chuckled. If you think we have something in this house to steal, you better let me in on the secret. She stopped, laughing, and smiled kindly at him. Don't forget the saying, son. One day for police and one day for thief. Life always has a way of balancing things out in the end. Resigned that he had lost yet another argument for the morning, JV nodded and signed. Okay, I'll get the basket, Granny.
All right, Vernice, just to let you know, because the chapters are a little long, we're probably just going to the next one, right?
Yeah.
Okay, just letting you know. All right, so chapter 2, to market, to market. Fresh fish, shark, carrot, king, fresh fish. Get your provision here, cassava and sweet potato, eddos and yam. Vendors' shouts rang out over the noisy buzz that came from all quarters of the market. Granny B picked her way through the crowds, stopping every few paces to examine the wares being sold and to say good morning to neighbors and friends. With basket in hand, JB hung back a few paces and took in all the sights and smells of the Alcavere marketplace.
He would never openly admit to enjoying these weekly trips with his grandmother, but the truth was that once in the midst of all the action, he found it quite entertaining. On their left, JV spotted old Mr. Chin and his son Patrick at their fish stall. Mr. Chin was chatting animatedly with 4 customers. his razor-sharp knife either a barely visible blue as he adeptly cut the chosen fish into fillets for a glinting flash of metal, when he wielded it in the concert with his wild gesticulations. Patrick, in contrast to his father, worked silently, carefully arranging the display of fish and shrimp, and intermittently sprinkling it all with water to keep everything fresh and the flies at bay. From where he stood, JV couldn't see the contents of the weather-beaten barrel besides the counter, but knew it must contain throbbing mounds of legs and powerful vice-like gundies. What with each blue crab trying to scramble to the top of its neighbors' backs. He wondered idly if any of them would ever make a successful break for freedom, or if they were destined to keep pulling each other down. "Jason, you still with me?" Granny B asked, glancing over her shoulder. "Yes, Granny." "Well, keep close," she said as she added a jar of honey and a half-pound bag of pigeon peas to the basket. "We're heading for the provisions now." JV knew only too well that Granny B right now never turned out to be as immediate as it sounded. In fact, they had gone only a few paces when Doris George, who was bargaining with a weary-looking Mr. Charles over the price of a pound of bananas at the fruit store, caught sight of them and instantly put her haggling as well as the bananas on hold. Ooh.
As Doris turned to hail Granny B, Mr. Charles looked up to the heavens and mouthed what appeared to be a short prayer. Miss B, wait a minute." Doris's voice thundered over the general clamor of the market. "Don't worry, Charles, I'm coming right back." She charged through the crowd, her oversized yellow bag held above her head and her right elbow jutting out stiffly at her side, a good excuse for those who saw her coming to get out of the way. JV groaned inwardly. Everyone in Alcavere knew Doris George. And Doris, she knew everyone's business, not only in Alcavere, but in any town within a 20-mile radius, and for some reason, Granny B was her favorite audience. Perhaps Doris thought that because Granny B treated a number of villagers with various afflictions, the old lady was a good source of gossip. But since Granny B was not interested in salacious tattling, and always said, in fact, that it was better to mind old clothes than people's business, JV knew that she tried to keep her interactions with Doris as infrequent and as brief as possible, however challenging that goal proved. But alas, Doris was now upon them. As usual, her hair was hidden under a head wrap, and today's saffron yellow print must have been specially selected to match her bag.
Salt and pepper strands poked out just in front of her ears, which were adorned with large gold hoop earrings that shone in the sunlight. "Good morning, Miss B. I know I would have seen you here today. I was just telling Charles to keep a lookout for you. You don't see how his bananas looking? And I never see in all my life see small oranges like ones he trying to pass off. All the lettuce by the coast stall shrivel up. Everything in the market looking quail bay. Must be the weather. We're supposed to be in rainy season, but not a drop. All this heat has me tired. But anyhow, I wanted to tell you thanks for that tonic you made for me." Doris gave her stomach a few contented pats. "Everything looking good now." "I'm so glad the sapodilla bark worked, Doris," Granny B said. "Oh my, that's the time? Come on, Jason, we have to get those provisions before. But wait, Jason, you here too? I didn't even see you helping your granny out in the market. Nice child. So school on vacation now, eh? What you going to do for the holidays? I know you young people always getting into some kind of mischief, so your granny going to have to keep a good eye on you. Not so, Miss V?" "Yes, of course, Doris, but Jason and I really have to. And I'm talking about mischief. Just yesterday, the Simon boy and some of his little ragamuffin friends went up old Grandpa Gregory Hog Plum tree and started eating all the man-ripe plum. And what do you think happened? When he came outside with a big stick to get them down, they pelted him with the green plums and seeds."
"It's true the old man is a cantankerous so-and-so, and I even hear he dabbling in obeah. But how those boys harass that man is criminal, I tell you." JV stifled a laugh. Randall Simon and his buddies had made a name for themselves as the village troublemakers and had boldly chosen the imposing tree in front of Pa Gregory's house as their main lineman spot. Confrontations between them and the old man were frequent, but this was the first time that JV had heard of one that involved a stick and flying plum seeds. He felt badly for Pa Gregory, but would have loved to have witnessed such a scene. Doris pulled a handkerchief from the top of her dress and energetically mopped her brow. And speaking of criminals, you didn't hear how that big-time murderer Tricky Dixon escaped from prison in the capital yesterday? Yes, girl, big search going on up there now. It's a good thing Alcavere not close to London town, or I would have been out of here so fast they wouldn't catch me for dust. But I think we're safe. Who would want to come and hide here anyway? This place so small that if you sneeze, all of Alcavere will say, bless you. Nah, I think Tricky's still right there in the capital. Doris kept up her monologue, and between the drone of her voice and the pleasant warmth of the morning sun, JV's mind was soon wandering again. First, to how much fun it would be if he were up there in the capital with Riaz, so that they could start their own investigation into Tricky Dixon's whereabouts, an inquiry that would undoubtedly result in Tricky's recapture, as well as a reward and limitless praise for himself and Riaz. And then to how he still needed to find a fellow explorer for his mission into Oscuros.
Of course, this train of thought only led right back to a certain Mr. Phipps, who he still knew very little about. And the more he pondered it, the greater his desire became to get some answers out of their house guests once they returned home. There was no way JV was going to let him off the hook so easily a second time. An unnaturally loud cackle from Doris, the pitch of which drew stares and a startled jump from those standing close by, brought JV out of his imaginings. But Miss B, I really have to get going now. Look at the hour. I don't know how you always end up holding me in these long talk, but I still have to pass back by Charles and sort him. And those bananas out before the scamp packs up and leaves for the day. Don't worry though, you'll see me later. I'll pass by the house and get some tonic for that other thing I was telling you about. A conspiration, I can't even say that word right now. A conspired wink, another cackle, and Doris George headed in direction of poor Mr. Charles, who did indeed seem to be trying to make a quick escape. The not-so-brief interlude with Doris safely behind them, Granny B and JV resumed their progression through the market. Straight ahead was a Decoto provision stall, which was to be their next and, if left to JV, final stop. The day was getting hot. The basket that he had been dutifully lugging around was beginning to feel like a laden weight on his arm, and he was anxious to return home.
His growing discomfort was at least partially relieved, however, when a few more paces brought them before rows of lettuce, carrots, peppers, yams, plantains, eddos, cassava, and corn. They were neatly laid out on wooden counters at the front of the stall. Colorful, yes, but not exactly vibrant. JV eyed 3 empty plastic soft drink crates sat close to the hot peppers at one end of a counter and promptly took a seat, resting the basket on the ground beside him. He looked on as Granny B walked along the rows of vegetables. She picked up some plantains and gave them a gentle squeeze, closed her eyes and raised ears of corn to her slightly flared nostrils to assess their delicate scents, and peered intently at the heads of lettuce, perhaps to judge for herself whether Doris's analysis had been correct. For once, Doris had not exaggerated. JV knew from years of listening to Granny B that the sagging yellow-green lettuce leaves, their rippled edges tinged with a brown, that from all appearances would continue its slow creep toward the center, were evidence enough that the dry season had gone on too long and the rains were due. Paulette de Coteau, noticing Granny B's prolonged interest in the lettuce, came up and smiled faintly from the other side of the counter. She was of medium build, probably in her 40s, and her amber eyes reminded JV of stars, although he had not seen them twinkle for some time. All this sun and no rain really making things tough, she said, waving an arm apologetically over the wilting leaves.
Granny B nodded. Well, we should have some rain soon, God willing. She selected a lettuce head that was not as bad as some of its neighbors and held it out to Paulette's son, Mason. Here, handsome, come and weigh this for me, please. Mason approached, said good morning to Granny B, gave a brief nod to JV, and took the lettuce. JV knew him from school. He was 3 grades ahead and was usually among the group of students who were to be found on the soccer field before classes began in the mornings, at break, during lunch, and immediately after the final bell at 3 o'clock. JV had some of his friends often looked on as one of the players ran the length of the field, tapping the ball between one foot and the other, blocking an opponent who approached for a steal or passing it off to a teammate. From the sidelines, JV would roar just as loudly and as with much enthusiasm as any of the players when the blur of white and black eluded the goalie and slammed into the net. Although the older students were friendly enough and JV longed to join in, neither he nor his friends had ever been invited to play, and he had always been too shy to ask. Perhaps next term, JV said to himself, averting his gaze from Mason's face and looking down to kick at the hard dirt with his leather sandals. He knew full well that even the 8 weeks that stretched ahead would not be enough time for him to develop the necessary nerve.
Refocusing on the exchange between Granny B and Mrs. Decoto, JV gathered that the conversation had shifted from the weather to Adele, Mason's 8-year-old sister. Despite her young age, she was a fixture at the Decoto stall on weekends, helping customers choose their produce and bargain their purchases. If she wasn't chatting with shoppers, she was tiptoeing on a stool at the back of the stall to reach a makeshift blackboard, carefully writing prices in colored chalk and decorating the borders with flowers and hearts. JB had noticed that she and Mason seemed close and that her big brother called her little bird. He didn't see her at the stall that day. She's in punishment this weekend, Mrs. Decoto was saying to Granny B. That sweet child? Granny B asked. What's she done? Well, little Madame left the house yesterday evening and didn't say boo to anyone about where she was going. You believe that? At 8 years old? Nah, man, Miss B. As they say, we're taking in front with this one. You have to bend the tree before it starts to grow. If not, can you imagine what she'll be doing when she's 13 and figures she's a grown woman? Mrs. Decoto let out an exasperated sigh. And the thing is, she doesn't usually give any trouble at all. Always playing quiet in her room with her dolls, making puzzles, helping her father, or 2 steps behind Mason. But yesterday, like she caught her vaps and just disappeared after dinner. We thought she followed Mason to football, and I was about to pass by the field when she came home. Mrs. Decoto sucked her teeth and continued.
Miss B, no amount of talking, threatening, or pleading would make that girl tell me where she went. I told her it was dangerous, that she had to always tell her father or me when she was leaving the house. And do you know what the little imp did? No quarreling, no back chat from her, No siree. She just nodded and went right off to her room. Earl was beside himself with worry. And it's the last thing he needs right now in his condition. She looked off into the distance, over the drooping vegetables, and up into the sun-baked hills, before continuing in a softer tone. I wonder if it's because Mason is heading off to the city today. Mason, who was still fiddling with the lone lettuce and the scales, finally looked up. Don't worry too much, Mommy. You know little bird. She probably found a sick animal or something and is taking care of it in secret. I promise I'll talk to her before I leave. Mrs. Decoto relaxed slightly and gave her son a wan smile that didn't reach her eyes. Here's your lettuce, Miss B, Mason added. He handed it over and was soon on the opposite side of the stall, talking to the other customers. Jumping off the crates and dusting the seats of his pants, JV took the lettuce from Granny B and dropped it in his basket. Not too far away, he had heard the familiar call of Miss Jean, the sweets vendor, and he was hoping that he could at least buy a tamarind ball before they returned home. Or perhaps a piece of fudge or peppermint candy. I don't try that.
So what is about Mason heading to Landing Town? Granny B asked Mrs. Decoto as she rooted around in her shoulder bag for her purse. He's leaving this evening. You know how he is with his hands, right? If he's not off playing football, he's always tinkering with something or other. Well, he's serious about becoming a mechanical engineer and found an apprenticeship in the capital for a month. All this tricky Dixon business going on up there has me a little worried, but it'll be good for him, I think. He'll get some experience and be able to make the kind of money he can't down here. It should also help us pay for his father's medications. JB thought about how lucky Mason was to be going to Landing Town and to be traveling there by himself. JB had never been in a maxi taxi. According to Granny B, the large striped passenger vans drove too fast and made the whole world deaf with their loud music, which made him doubt that he would ever be allowed to set foot in one of them, much less do so without his grandmother. Having finally found her change purse, Granny B handed Mrs. Decoto the money for the lettuce. JB decided this was as good a time as any to delicately bring up the topic of Miss Jean and her sweets. Granny, he tested hopefully. And how is Earl feeling? Granny B asked Mrs. Decoto. I haven't seen him at the stall for 2 weeks now. Well, he has his good days and his bad ones, she responded.
This problem with Adele didn't help, of course. But the doctor has him on some new tablets, so we're hoping for the best. Every week it's something else. She let out another weary sigh. You know, you just have to say the word, and I can mix something up quick, quick for him. That might help, Granny V offered. Paulette twisted one of the gold rings on her fingers and shook her head slowly. Thank you, Miss B, but we've never been one for traditional medicine. No offense. Granny B patted the younger woman's arm. Just let me know if there's anything I can do to help. Then she looked across at JB. But Jason, like you need to use the bathroom more. You dancing, so. No, Granny, I just wanted to know if I could head over to Miss G now. Yes, and take this with you. Granny B rummaged for her change purse once again. She pulled out 2 crumpled dollar bills and pressed them into JV's palm. You could leave the basket, son. I may pick up 1 or 2 more things before I come to meet you. He needed to hear no more. With a thanks, Granny, shouted over his shoulder, he scampered off towards the round old lady whose dimpled cheeks were as smooth and dark as the molasses candy that she sold. When JV got to Miss Jean, she was already surrounded by a swarm of children, each vying for her attention, their arms waving dollar bills and loose fists jingling change.
Seated on a little wooden stool in the midst of them all, she was indeed the Pied Piper of Alcavere. 4 large wicker baskets lay at her feet, each exposing its goodies. JB joined the throng and squeezed himself forward. He could see the array of treats now, bright green purple balls, red and white peppermint sticks, treats are packed, creamy squares of vanilla and chocolate fudge, perfectly round tambourine balls whose sugary coatings belied their tangy interior. And those were just the ones at the top. He knew that somewhere in there was also milky coconut drops and stick to the roof of your mouth, almost black with molasses balls of tulum. JB was so engrossed in his thoughts of getting to the candy that a sudden surge in the crowd knocked him off balance. He was only able to regain his footing by leaning heavily on a pair of narrow shoulders in front of him. The person spun around. What the? But recognition instantly dawned on the vexed face, and its features softened into a big smile. Hey, JB, you're lucky as you. I was about to give whoever it was a good piece of my mind. How are you doing? It was Carol Pearson, his classmate and fellow passenger on trips to and from school in her father's car. Although they were the same age, Carol always seemed older to JB. He chalked it up to the fact that she, like most of the other children in his class, was a few inches taller than he was. That and the fact that she was always correcting him. I'm good, Carol. Just happy we don't have school for 8 weeks. Oh, and sorry about pushing you. I was about to fall, Anne.
She waved him off. Don't worry, no harm done. Fingers found a few loose, curly strands of hair and poked them into the bun on top of her head. Hey, what do you want from Miss Jean? She asked, eyeing JV's bills. Give me your money and I'll get it. Just keep an eye on Pascal back there for me. JV handed over the $2 and put in his order for tambourine balls and fudge. He noticed Pascal, Carol's 7-year-old brother, at the edge of the crowd and eased his way out of the crush of bodies to stand next to him. Pascal was a precocious, plump little boy who didn't let his 2 missing front teeth and consequent lisp hinder his chatty enthusiasm. Hey, JV, Carol's getting your tweets too? I'm getting peppermint sticks. They're my favorite. What's yours? Tamarind balls. But I'm also getting some fudge for my granny. She loves sweet stuff. You believe she puts sugar and condensed milk in her tea? So are you and Carol doing anything fun for vacation? Pascal cocked his head and tapped an index finger on his chin. I don't think so. So, but Daddy said he'll teach me to swim. Though maybe we'll go to the beach. What about you? What are you going to do? JV was itching to tell him about his plans involving the forest, but wasn't sure if he should. Most children in Alcavere didn't want anything to do with Oscuros, and JV knew that his eagerness to charge in there on an exploratory mission would probably seem strange.
But that wasn't his only reason to hesitate. There was also the possibility his plans would be too well received and he could lose control over the adventure, a far more unsettling thought. He was still debating when Carol emerged with the goodies. Here you go, JB, she said, handing over the 2 packets of fudge and tamarind balls. And here are your 6, Pascal. Remember, Mommy said you can only eat 1 now. Yes. The younger person responded impatiently, ripping open the top of the plastic pack and hungrily starting on his first stick. Carol rolled her eyes and shook her head, then turned her attention back to JB. Any plans for the rest of the day? JB had made up his mind. He realized that Carol might actually be a good second in command. She was smart and probably as adventurous as he was. He just hoped that she wouldn't try to pull too much of her know-it-all stuff. Actually, yes. I'm going to start exploring Oscuros this afternoon. You want to come? Sounds good to me, Carol said. What are you looking for in there anyway? Nothing specific, but who knows what we'll find, JB answered, getting excited. She shrugged. Okay, whatever. But Pascal will probably have to come with us. The two classmates had barely begun to discuss their plans when JB was suddenly aware of a whisper emanating from the knot of children close by.
His body immediately stiffened in trained response to the anger he felt at hearing the singing song. Bossy bee, curled over like a sea. Bossy bee, if I run, you're never catching me. He saw that Granny Bee was making her way towards him. JB wished that the silly chant didn't bother him so much, or that he could tell them to stop singing it. But he recognized the unlikelihood of either of those two things ever coming to pass. It was time to go. So see you around 2, then, he confirmed to Carol. By the track to the forest. She gave him a thumbs up, and skipping his goodbyes, JB left her, Pascal, and the barely audible singing behind as he ran off to meet Granny Bee. I want to go into the forest.
I really want to know what happens next. But
so I might have read ahead.
You read ahead?
I might have read ahead.
You ruined it for yourself. All right. So
we have to stop after 2, right?
Yes, we have to stop after 2.
Sorry, guys.
So if you tune in tomorrow night, you'll be able to find out what's going to happen with JV and Pascal and everybody that we met in these first 2 chapters. So anything you want to say, Vernice, before we wrap up?
I don't know.
I guess
I want to know if Pascal ate just 1 stick or if he ate more.
I don't feel so. I want to know more.
I want
to know about more that gossip with that tricky Dixon that Doris was talking about up in Capital. That's what I want to know.
Doris, everybody's story in the whole place, everybody's story. But what else does she want Granny Bee to fix too? Because she was kind of...
That sounded a little private. I don't know if we'll find that out. It sounded a little private.
And then is Mr. Phipps still at the house? Did he teach something?
All this time, Mr. Phipps is chilling in the house. But
he eat all the food. He gone. All the bulgur.
That's all it had in the house. All it had in the house to teach was the bulgur.
I kind of want the bulgur. Mommy! Mom!
I wanted sweets. I wanted tamarind ball and thing after I saw that.
Where they describe the tulum, like stuck on the top of
Not a tulum fan. No amount of lovely description can make me eat tulum. Anyway.
Really? I love tulum. It's good for you. Molasses. All right. Anyways.
So everybody, thanks again for joining us for Read2Me TT's nightly bedtime series. But before we go, it's important that everybody listen to this part. It's so important. If you want to be a little superhero, this is what you have to do. Wash your hands all the time. Keep your hands out of your mouth and remind mommy, daddy, granny, everybody that always when they're out in public, they have to wear their masks. If they go, you can even make a game out of it and you can sing happy birthday while you wash your hands so you know that you've washed them for long enough.
We can do this. Why? Because we are in this together. So we'll see you guys tomorrow. At least you won't see us, but you'll see 2 new readers. But continuing on this story.
Tuning in tomorrow.
I'm going to be in the comments figuring out what's about to happen. So join us tomorrow in the comments so that we can figure out what happens to Pascal, Carol, Granny Bee, and everybody.
All right, guys. Thanks for joining us.
Toodles.
Bye.